we feel the best, when we're in this middle speed, Goldilocks speed, the brain needs some kind of external stimulation or the external urge to raise its own gear. Your mind is most efficient when it's moving ahead at this middle speed of processing information. The art of being able to navigate yourself and stay in that zone while you're doing knowledge work is a secret to hyperefficiency, because when you're in that zone, the kind of work you'll be doing will be the best you can do. The kind of break you take has to be tailored to the state of mind you're in when you were working. As soon as you take a break, as soon as you stop what you're doing, your mind will relax.
That's Dr. Mithu Storoni. She's a University of Cambridge-trained physician, neuroscience researcher, and ophthalmic surgeon. Her expertise in mental performance and stress management has led her to help several multinational corporations. Her new book, Hyperefficient, Optimize Your Brain to Transform the Way You Work, draws on her years of experience exploring the brain's potential for peak performance. So you'll learn 1, how to identify and get into the best mental groove for your work. 2, what to do when work gets either too boring or too overwhelming. And 3, the trick to resetting your brain. I'm Pete Bakaitis. This is How to Be Awesome at Your Job. And now, here's Mithu. Mithu, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I am excited to chat about becoming hyper efficient. And I'm imagining, well, it's in London where you are, so it's been a few hours in the day. Have you hyper efficiently already taken care of tons of tasks today, Mithu?
I've tried to be as hyper efficient as I can. Every day is a different one. If you have a different kind of day, depending on the kind of day you have, it's all about tailoring your tasks and fitting them around your own rhythm. So every day I do different things, and so every day I have a certain different timetable.
All right. Well, so I'm so intrigued to hear about that. And I understand that's one of your core theses here is we want to align our work with our natural rhythms of our brain, as opposed to trying to contort ourselves to what is externally imposed upon us. Is that a fair synopsis?
That's absolutely fair. And if you want a little bit of background, I wrote the book when I realized how the way we work today is very much a hangover from the era of assembly lines. So when we had the Industrial Revolution quite a long time ago, we had assembly lines. We were producing quantities of things, of refrigerators, of cars, of hairdryers. And during that time, the number of items you produced decided how productive you were. And the longer you stayed on the assembly line, the more productive you were because the more items you assembled. When we then had the shift into knowledge work post-Second World War, around the 1950s, where the majority of the work became office work, became sort of what we used to call white collar. We actually changed the work, but we didn't change the way we did the work. So our work hours, the way we measured work, continued in pretty much the same way. We still looked at how many hours we were sitting on the seat. We get paid on overtime. Productivity is all about targets. We then had another shift, which is the kind of shift we still have now, where we started producing intangible goods rather than tangible refrigerators. And so when intangible goods, such as a software solution, such as other solutions, ideas, it create the bottom line. So they become the principal thing that will make a difference to your company, to your organization. You need to think about the quality, not the quantity. So it no longer matters how many software solutions you manufacture or how many software solutions you think of or how many ideas you think of. You could have 1,000 mediocre ideas. They will be just as unproductive as having one mediocre idea. We now need to shift to thinking extremely well. So producing one exceptional quality solution, exceptionally creative idea, rather than 100 bad ones. In order to do that, the brain can no longer sit and work continuously as if it were producing or assembling its idea parts on an assembly line. How long you sit on your chair and the way you sit influences how well your mind performs. But we have created a template around that, which is a hangover from the past. Now we have technology doing all the monotonous, the routine, the sort of quantity heavy jobs aspects of knowledge work. So now we need to be even better at creating ideas, at forming solutions. And in order to do that, we need to change the way we work in a radically different way.
Okay, understood. That all seems to check out in terms of the way the world used to work and the way things are working currently. I'm curious when it comes to us working at our finest to come up with these exceptional ideas and solutions. Is there anything really striking or surprising you've discovered about what holds us back and what unleashes us to this greatness?
Yes. So I approached this subject from my background, which is in neuroophthalmology, neuroscience. And I'm very aware of the very, very exciting research field at the moment, looking at the brain's dynamics. What we know is that the brain is a complex system. It changes state. And there is a network in the brain called the locus coeruleus norepinephrine network, which influences how alert you are. It influences how you pay attention. That's one angle of the story. We have uncovered quite a lot of data about this network and how the faster it fires, the more alert, the more sort of wired you become. The slower it fires, the calmer you become. If you take that, I'm diluting it a little bit, but if you take that, you add in the cholinergic network, you add in the dopaminergic network, you create the whole map. You realize that when you are performing mental work, knowledge work of any kind, your brain has to be, or your mind has to be, in a certain configuration in order to perform one particular type of task particularly well. So, for instance, let's take two examples of knowledge work. Let's take creative idea generation, and let's take a different kind where you are focusing on something. So, if you imagine an organization, it has lots of teams, but it has two sub-teams, one focusing on innovation, the other focusing on implementation. The team focusing on innovation is going to focus on coming up with ideas, original ideas. What do we know about how the brain works? Or what is optimal for the brain when this happens? Well, we know that if you make the brain focus on one single target in front of you, such as a computer screen, your brain state is not going to be optimal to come up with those aha ideas because of the temporary structure of the brain at the time. Focusing is not conducive to gentle mind wandering. It's not conducive to letting your attention wander and pick up fragments of data, fragments of thoughts wandering in your head, which you then assemble, or to just waiting for aha moments, for moments of insight to spring up inside your head. That's one angle to it. Second angle, so detaching your attention is important, not focusing is important. A second angle to it is there is data that the time of day you work influences how well you work when you're doing creative work. So creative insights, creative idea generation seems to be better first thing in the day and last thing in the day, not in the middle of the morning and not in the middle or late in the afternoon. So in order to really, really optimize idea generation, creative idea generation, perhaps working in a slightly different way for this particular sub-team is going to be more suited for their performance. Similarly, if you take the second sub-team, which is working on logistics implementation, there they need to zone in, converge on ideas. Now, if you're converging on ideas, focusing does help. So their focused attention is going to be absolutely pivotal. We know focused attention, similar to, in the opposite way to creativity, focused attention, there seem to be some peak hours for that during the day. The middle to late morning is one of them. Immediately after lunch is not one of them. And later on in the day is a second slot. When you're doing focused attention, when you're paying focused attention or doing work that involves focused attention, it helps to sit undisturbed, sit in a very, very attentive state of mind and get that work done. So if you also think about how your mind is, when you're creative, your mind is sort of very gently, slowly mind wandering. When you're focusing, you want to be sharp. You want to really zone in to what's in front of you. These two states of mind are very, very different. So if you put all of that together, it shows you how you need to be in a certain state of mind that you can tell by looking at how well you focus, how well your mind can, how easy your attention can wander. A particular time of day is also helpful. And the third thing we haven't talked about is as soon as you work continuously, and you measure this as time on task when you measure this aspect in psychological experiments, when your brain works continuously on some kind of intense work, it becomes tired. When it becomes tired, its information processing pathways inside your head become inefficient. And when they become inefficient, you can actually you can visibly see the effect that has on mental output. So rather than coming up with lots of original ideas, you're much more likely to come up with ideas, but they're not going to be original. So how long you work for is a huge factor here, which is why you also have to put in this 90 or 100-minute ultradian rhythm, where you work in slots, and even within those segments of work, you pace how you work. That's a very long answer to your question.
Well, it's really beautiful, and it matches my own experience in terms of the groove, the flow, the rhythms, the vibe of work. And you talk about the creative and innovative side of things versus the implementation side of things. And sometimes I think of this as creating versus destroying. And I don't know, maybe just my raw kind of attitude, but it's like, I'm going to destroy my inbox. And by that, I mean, I'm going to process it with vigorous speed. We're going to do a 3-second sweep per message, a 20-second sweep per message, and we're going to watch that baby, shrink from 200 to 220 in short order. And that's kind of fun for me. But sure enough, that does require that I'm not distracted by other things. And my mind isn't wandering to interesting, fun things to pursue. That's kind of counterproductive to what I'm after, is shrinking this inbox in a hurry and dispatching messages so people get what they need from me, etc., which is totally different than the vibe is like, oh, this would be kind of cool if we tried this thing, and here's a fun idea. And oh, that sort of connects to this thing I'm hearing on a podcast over there. And so those are very different vibes. And so tell me, just to make this contrast all the more crisp and clear for us, do you have a name that you apply to each of these modes of brain operation?
I have. So in my book, I have created a metaphor, which is very helpful. And I describe the mind as being in 3 states in the specific context of knowledge work. And these are, I call them 3 gears, 1, 2, and 3. And in a very easy way of imagining them is slow, medium, and fast. The mind-wandering state, so the seek and destroy that you just described, which is going through your inbox. I love that analogy. I think it's a great way of describing it, creating and destroying. That state would be right in the middle of gear 2, which is the middle zone. Gear 1 is the kind of state of mind you have when you are really daydreamy. So maybe the first thing in the morning after you've woken up after a decent night's sleep, you haven't quite reached that sort of sharpness. You haven't reached for your coffee yet. You're kind of in a slight daydreamy zone. There's a sunrise in front of you. You're sort of, halfway. And your mind feels quite slow. Your attention is floating a lot. You don't have the ability to make it focus. It's very, very floaty. You think of thoughts, they come, they go. Gear 2 is when you can focus. This is the middle zone. As soon as you reach gear 2, you're able to focus. Within gear 2, you have a kind of a slow pace and you have a fast pace. The slow pace gear 2 is when you can both focus and you can let your attention wander, alternately, however you want. That is optimal for creativity, where you can just detach from what you're doing, let your attention wander a little bit, but as soon as you come up with an idea, with an insight, you can quickly zone your attention spotlight on there, focus on it, and bring it to fruition. That is gear 2, a slow gear 2. And then you have middle gear 2, which is what you describe as really intense, powerful focus. And then you leave gear 2 and then you go into gear 3. And gear 3 correlates with what is sometimes termed sort of a hyper arousal state. So in gear 3, your thoughts are faster, your actions are faster, but you can't perform analytical difficult thinking, and you cannot focus as well. So these are the three gears. Gear 1 is where you just wander. Gear 3, where your mind is very fast and you can't focus. Gear 2 is right in the middle. And in Gear 2, you can navigate by playing with your attention, detaching it, letting it wander around to go into kind of a light, creative Gear 2 or a really deep focused Gear 2.
Now, when you say hyperarousal, gear 3, just make sure I'm understanding this. I'm thinking about, like, is this like I'm enraged, a situation, or what are some of the scenarios or illustrations of hyperarousal?
So we are diluting these into single terms, but these are all scales. These all have a range. So if you look inside the brain, people in a state of hyperarousal, this particular network in the brain is firing very fast. And the faster it fires, the more your physiological arousal increases. But just outside this zone where you can focus, the moment, so let's just say you're sitting there, you're focusing on your email, you're doing really well. And then a colleague keeps making herself or himself a cup of coffee. And every time they do this, they come and give you one because they're really kind. And so you inadvertently just keep sipping those espressos while you work just because they happen to be there. After one espresso, it's great. Your focus is even better. But after another 5, which you don't realize you've had, suddenly the noise that you heard behind you, the noise of the drilling outside or the traffic outside or someone speaking on their phone, suddenly seems really sharp. You couldn't hear it a minute ago, but after 5 espressos, you suddenly can. And so your threshold for being distracted is suddenly lowered, so you can become easily distracted. Then, by this time, you haven't realized you've had those 5 espressos. Some more espressos appear, and you keep drinking those. And as you drink them, eventually, you reach a point where your focus is completely gone. And you're simply just reacting to the situation. You're doing very low-level cognitive stuff. And every sort of small distraction around you is grabbing your attention away. And as you increase that, you can eventually get into the stage that we do term that falls under the canopy, the banner of rage. But that sort of gear 3 state is where you become easily distractible. Subtle things become amplified. You become more anxious, more vigilant. So it's a hyper-vigilant state. And the faster this network fires, the more you go into this state, the more amplified it becomes. So it's a scale. This whole thing is a scale. Gear 1 itself is a scale. Gear 2 is a scale. Gear 3 is a scale. And within those, you're modulating yourself.
I hear you. It's like we just got one very long continuum.
Correct.
It's like the entirety of human experience. and we're segmenting it into 3/3 to make it a little bit more workable to discuss and interact with. So I guess I'm wondering now, this might be dangerous talking to neuroscience about this, but you mentioned, so we got some choline, some dopamine. What is should I call them biomarkers or biochemical things or heart rate or brainwave frequency? What's the stuff going down at our brain body level within each of these 3 things in terms of is like a little bit in 1, a medium amount in 2, and a whole lot in 3 of these fundamental ingredients?
So very basically, let's look at norepinephrine. So norepinephrine, many of you will have heard of it. It's associated with exercise. Because we talk about how we've got to get that adrenaline pumping or, get that norepinephrine. And very, very loosely, these 3 gear states describe or correlate with 3 patterns of firing of a network in the brain that is the brain's headquarter of norepinephrine. So in a very simple way of saying that, as norepinephrine levels vary in your brain, there's a part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex that sits right behind your forehead. The prefrontal cortex is your brain's seat for focus, attention, any kind of high-level cognitive work. Analysis, thinking, remembering, working memory, you name it, the prefrontal cortex is the seat of higher thinking. This entire region of the brain, prefrontal cortex, it's absolutely pivotal for knowledge work, and it becomes very, very active at middle levels of norepinephrine. So when you're in gear 2, it's the Goldilocks zone of norepinephrine that brings your prefrontal cortex completely online. When you have too much norepinephrine, when you enter gear 3, your prefrontal cortex goes partly offline. And this is why being in gear 2 is ideal and essential for focused work.
Okay. Well, this is cool. And so I'm curious. So putting it in this terms, I could see that if you're in gear 1, yeah, that'll bring you to gear 2 or gear 3, the jumping up and down, they're smacking your chest, you're screaming, yes, yes, yes. That'll do it. Go for it.
I was just going to say, so I think the 3 gears are a metaphor of 3 different mental states, but I would not think of it like a racing car. So when you're in gear 1, it's simply a description of a different state. Okay. So when you're in gear 1 and you're in this kind of slow mind wandering state, you can't focus because you are just not sort of awake enough to focus then. Gear 2 is when there is more norepinephrine. Your prefrontal cortex is engaged. You can focus. You can do high level cognitive work. And gear 3 is when there is more norepinephrine. You can think faster, but you can't do high level cognitive work because your prefrontal cortex is partly offline. Now, when you're doing any kind of knowledge work, you're actually shuttling between these 3 states in the sense that, for instance, if you're solving a problem, you have to be mainly in a state of focus. All right. But as soon as you hit a wall or your mental slate gets crammed with data, you have to briefly move out of that state into gear 1 to wipe your slate clean and to refresh the angle that you're taking. So if you've hit a wall, your brain needs to step back and look at the problem from afar or from a different angle. That's when you need to briefly foray into gear 1 to do that. And then you might see something you were missing. You might feel a little bit more refreshed. Then you go back into gear 2. So although your baseline is gear 2, you're going to keep coming back into gear 1 every now and again to change your mental state in order to overcome a wall or to just refresh your mind. So it's not like you are getting into these, fast, high-powered kind of racing track scenarios. It's very much a way of your brain is mainly in gear 2, but gear 1 is essential. And that's why gear 1 is the mental state you have when you take a break. So as an example, if you're focusing on your inbox and your email inbox, and you're working through it, every time you close your eyes, your brain immediately goes into gear 1 for a bit. And then when you open your eyes, you're back into gear 2. But what I'm describing here is the baseline you're in for the majority of time. The whole thing isn't a flat line. And that's how the brain is. But the overall general state of the brain when you're in a mode of focus versus when you're in a mode of gentle daydreaming are very different. And these are the states I describe with gear 1, 2, and 3.
Okay, understood. So then I imagine one of the things you want to do in order to accomplish a whole lot of stuff is to just schedule the kinds of activities when things are naturally going to be great for that. In terms of, if I need to have some brilliant epiphany, aha, eureka moments, well, then let's schedule some thinking, daydreaming, wandering time in the early morning or late at night, etc. So there's kind of working with our schedules and our rhythms and 90 to 100-minute cycles of stuff. That's cool. And then I'm curious if the situation calls for us to be in a bit of a different gear than we find ourselves in. What do you recommend we do?
So if I give you a typical day, so just say you are a writer, you are looking for an idea. So if that's your job, if that's your task for the day, what you would do is you'd wake up probably in the morning quite early. And once you're up in the morning, you would tackle the creative aspect of things there and then. You wouldn't wait for later in the morning. You'd use the kind of very gentle, relaxed, not quite committed state of mind you have, which would be perfect for that kind of work, that kind of idea generation. And then once you have your idea, later on in the morning, you feel a little more alert, you can focus a little bit more, and your mind is wandering a lot less. You're kind of much less in that kind of gentle daydreamy mode. There you sit down, you focus and write or type. And then you continue that pattern as I describe. It changes slightly for the rest of the day. So if you're entering one of those sessions, one of those work sessions, and you're in the wrong gear, So let's say you are doing focused work, you're starting at 9 o'clock in the morning, and you are still in that kind of distracted, mind wandering state of mind. If that's the case, there are a couple of ways you can use your body's physiology to make your mind think differently. So, for instance, we know that if you make your body active and alert, your mind becomes your mind becomes active and alert too. Intuitively, you know that to be true. Physiologically, we know that if you do, for instance, a few sprints before you sit down, when you are feeling a little bit kind of slow and lethargic, that immediately wakes you up. It doesn't have to be sprints. Any kind of exercise will wake you up. We know that intuitively. And when we say wake you up, it also changes your mental state. You go from feeling lethargic to feeling more alert, much more able to focus. Conversely, we know that you can also use your body to relax your mind. So if you are feeling very, very wired, if you're working in an office where things are very, very sort of deadlines are very frequent, activity is very fast, everything is very hectic, and you really need to calm down and you need to focus and you need to think about something, in that sort of situation, you can use your body. You can use three elements, actually. You can use your environment to calm you down. So we know that if you bring elements of your environment to be slow, low, and soft and dark, your mind also climbs down. So if you have, for instance, a background music or background sounds which have low frequency beats, sounds which are low pitch, not high pitch.
You mean like bass, like do, like that?
Like very slow drum beats, or like ocean sounds. There's reason why we're attracted to ocean sounds. Okay. So slow beats, slow rhythms, low pitch around you. So, as an obvious example, if you listen to radio shows or breakfast shows first thing in the morning, people will be speaking very fast at a higher pitch. If you listen to radio shows very late at night, people will be speaking slower with slightly lower pitch. And that is to really match the viewer's state of mind. But in the morning, it's to really draw the viewer into a more alerting state of mind, to wake them up, essentially. So your environment can change in this way. Colors and intensity of light also have a role to play. So there is data that shows that warm, so reddish tones, soft, warm hues are better for creative idea generation. Whereas blue light or blue dominant white light, the kind of light you get in the middle of the day or in the middle of the morning, even in most latitudes, that's conducive to being focused and alert. So if you're doing a night shift and you really, really need to focus, then using light can help you be in the right state of mind. So light, sound, your physiology. So muscle, when you contract muscle, you feel more alert. But when you release it, you feel more relaxed. Similarly, when you stretch muscle and release it, you feel more relaxed. And we know that people seek this kind of activity, whether PMR, whether yoga, any sort of stretching relaxation activity also relaxes the mind. We also have the third thing, which are breathing exercises. And there is now a lot of data to show that if you breathe at a frequency of around 5 breaths a minute with long exhalations, and Mara Martha in California has done amazing work on this with her team, you can also lower the gear of your mind. So bring your mind back to an optimal state.
Yeah, this is beautiful. I'm thinking then, if we're in a state where it's just like, I don't feel like doing anything, that's sort of like the sleepy state. And so more arousal would be helpful if what needs to happen is some smart, focused work. And if likewise, it's like, I'm freaking out about this thing, well, then we want to maybe do some more of the stretching, the slow breathing, the low lights, etc.
And adjust your environment.
Well, now you got me wondering, like, it's so funny. I'm thinking about mindfulness meditation stuff. And there are times when it feels so amazingly wonderful. Like, yes, this is just delightful. And there are times in which my brain is just furious. Just like, this is so boring. I can't stand it. And so it seems like, is this kind of the fundamental dynamic at work? Or do you think there's some other dimensions to be considered in this context as well?
So I'm so happy you brought up the word boring, because this is really, really important. Now, when you're working on something, when you're doing knowledge work, you're working on something, in gear 2, you're in peak focus, you're engaged. All right. But if what you're doing is boring, Then a little while along, 10, 15 minutes, whatever, you suddenly feel your mind wandering and your focus slipping away. Not because you're tired. The work isn't tiring at all. Or let's imagine the work isn't tiring at all. You're just noticing your focus just slip away. In that sort of scenario, you are sliding into gear 1 because you are bored. And there you need more stimulation or a bigger load to get you back into gear 2. So one way is, as you say, you need more stimulation. So maybe change the environment, go to a place that wakes you up. But you can also do it through the work you're doing. So for instance, multitasking gets bad press. But if what you're doing is boring and you're sliding into gear 1, multitasking can actually keep you in gear 2 because anything that engages your mind, engages your brain, causes you to put in cognitive effort, will raise you back, will raise your gear. And it's for the same reason that if you're working very well, but you have an enormous workload or you're getting information you don't want and you're being forced to process it while you're doing the work that you're doing, you're having to really step on the pedal. You're putting in more cognitive effort. And that requires norepinephrine. And there you're shifting up to gear 3 to be able to cope. So actually you can modulate your gear with the work you are doing. So if your work is very boring, actually multitasking and doing something in parallel can put you back into the right frame of mind.
Okay, understood. And so I guess I'm wondering if we don't have the option of changing the thing that we're doing, maybe we're in a meeting and we think it's boring. I suppose internally in our own brains, we would maybe make up a game, or what do you recommend there in terms of if it's like, here we are, we're in the meeting, we're supposed to be polite and not whip out our laptops or phones or something. Any pro tips there?
So if you're in a meeting and you just have to attend the meeting, but not contribute or not take anything away from the meeting, then it's a great opportunity to get into a creative state of mind, be in gear 1, let your mind wander, and just use that as a break. So let your mind wander, let your attention wander, try not to dwell on anything, and just use that as a refresher palette for your mind. If you have to stay awake during a meeting, and simply stay awake, not necessarily contribute, then doing something while you are in that meeting. So solving a problem with pen and paper discreetly while you're there is another way of dealing with it. So you add your workload, you increase your cognitive load to stay in the right state of mind. So the bottom line of all of this is really that we all function the best. We don't just work the best when we do knowledge work. We actually function and we feel the best when we're in this middle speed, is a good way of imagining it, in this kind of middle speed, Goldilocks speed. And in order for the brain to put itself into that middle speed, the brain needs, first of all, some kind of external stimulation or the external urge to raise its own gear for some other reason. So for instance, if it's receiving a lot of load, the brain is going to work harder to cope with it. If cognitive load is very low, it's going to get very bored and slip out of gear 2. If that happens, then you can bring in extra cognitive load or bring in extra stimulation to keep the brain in this middle zone. Your brain is really an information processing machine. And its optimal pace of processing that information is gear 2. So you need to give it enough information to keep it there. And if you swing over, if you overshoot, you end up in gear 3. So if you're going down from gear 3 to gear 2, another way to look at it is, if you're going down from gear 3 to gear 2, then reduce the number of tasks you're doing, reduce the difficulty of the task you're doing, remove time pressure, remove uncertainty, and then adjust your environment to make it lower, slower paced. And then, of course, you can add in these physiological buttons through your muscle relaxation, through your autonomic nervous system. So ultimately, your mind is most efficient when it's moving ahead at this middle speed of processing information. And the art of being able to navigate yourself and stay in that zone while you're doing knowledge work is a secret to hyper efficiency. Because when you're in that zone, the kind of work you'll be doing will be the best you can do. You can still do a lot of work while you're bored. You can also do a lot of work while you're in gear 3. You can type hundreds of emails. You can even type them faster. But the quality, you won't be able to solve a difficult differential equation in gear 3 or plan a killer chess move in gear 3. You'll be able to play chess, but you probably lose in the first 15 moves.
30 seconds, bullet games.
Exactly. In gear 1, you're not engaged enough to think, to analyze either. But in gear 2, in this middle zone, when your brain is just awake enough, alert enough, but not too wired, that's when it processes information the fastest. And hence, it does it in the best possible way.
You said the word refresh earlier, and I'm curious if we're doing these 90 to 100 minute bouts, a break is just necessary. Do you have any suggestions on what is a supremely or hyper efficient or excellent means of breaking to restore our brain's capacity and capabilities quickly?
Yes. So when you're thinking of a break, just to give you a little bit of background, we now know through some very elegant forms of brain imaging that when you're doing intense mental work, something that requires you to pay attention, something like, solving math equations, as your brain cells work, they produce byproducts because they have little factories in them. They need energy to work. They use ATP. They produce byproducts. And as you're working, these byproducts accumulate and then they get cleaned away. Now, there is some evidence, and I mention where this data comes from in the book, that one reason for fatigue may well be that the rate at which you're producing these toxic byproducts is faster than your ability to clear them away. And so when you take a break and you stop the intensity of work, you're immediately giving your mind, your brain, an opportunity to recover. So that's the bottom line. Now, how should that break be? So in this context, think of the difference between the brain and muscle. So if you're lifting weights in a gym, the moment you stop lifting weights, your muscle relaxes. So when you stop working your muscle rests. But when your mind is working on its office chair, as soon as you move from the office chair and you even go and sit on a beach, your mind has not moved 1 inch. It carries on working. There is no stop switch on your mind. And so the kind of break you take has to be tailored to the state of mind you're in when you were working. So if your work was just very, very tiring, it wasn't in any way emotionally draining, emotionally triggering, just very, very tiring. And as soon as you stop, imagine you're having to read 100 boring emails that don't really mean anything, but they're just, your eyes are glazing over, that sort of state. If that's the case, then as soon as you take a break, as soon as you stop what you're doing, your mind will wander because you will relax. You won't dwell on your work so much. So in that sort of scenario, you can break and just do nothing. Just relax. You don't have to do anything actively. But if your work was or is in a situation where you have a lot of emotional tension, you have a deadline you're working for, you have a problem you really can't solve, you're still struggling with, the moment your break approaches, you're very likely to be what I call tired and wired, which means you are tired, you're physically tired, you're mentally tired, but your mind is still trying to process that information. So it has stepped on the accelerator, taken you right up to gear 3 to work through, and your gear just won't slide back. And you will intuitively, your listeners, and you will realize what this is, because it's the kind of feeling you have at the end of a day when you've just really pushed yourself to keep working beyond when you were tired by having coffee, by just carrying on. And so by the time you get home, you can't really switch off. You feel tired, but your mind is still buzzing. That's what I describe as tired and wired. If that's the case and you're taking a break in the middle of the day and you're feeling like that, then for the first few moments of your break, it's much more helpful to do something really absorbing that distracts you completely from the work you are working on. So play a game on your phone. Something like Tetris has been shown to be very effective in this sort of context. Other games like Tetris. Play a game on your phone or watch a video, watch something immersive until you momentarily forget the work you were just doing. As soon as you do, stop and then you relax.
Okay. So first we get into the forget zone, and then we stop and relax. Is there any way to relax better, or should we just chill?
So if you are in that forget zone, you can relax. I mentioned two kinds of breaks in the book. So I mentioned a break at the end of 90 minutes when you just need to refuel. I also mentioned a type of break, which I call a reset break. And this is the kind of break you would take within your work segment. So if you're doing a 90-minute block of work and your work is really intense, you will probably need to pause for a little while every 20 minutes or so, if your work is really, really intense. Or if your work is really, really boring, you will be forced to just kind of take a step back every 20 minutes or so and just be like, okay, I need to kind of wire my mind back up to cope with this. When you're taking a break in that context, what you're trying to do during the break is put your mind back into gear one. So as an example, imagine you are just watching paint dry. Okay, you're doing some kind of work which is really, really boring. You are in the right zone when you started that work. But about 10 minutes, 15 minutes into the work, your attention just floats away. You cannot bring it back. And everything just gets very slow, lethargic. At that point, take a quick 5-minute break and do something to bring you back into that zone. So that can be something physical. Physical is usually the easiest. So at that point, doing a quick bout of exercise will put you back in the best kind of mental zone where you can go back to doing that work focusing. So an applicable real world scenario of this is anything that requires you to keep monitoring something. So monitoring a camera, monitoring other machines working, monitoring a system. Every 20 minutes or so, your attention is going to melt away. And there you take a very quick break to actually not relax you, but to actually excite you back into the right mental zone.
Okay. Understood. Well, Mithu, tell me anything else you want to make sure to mention before we hear about some of your favorite things.
Certainly. So another aspect of work today, as well as these three gears, is the idea of how everything we've always used to motivate us in the past is changing because the whole map of knowledge work is drastically changing at the moment. We're having to retrain, we're having to reskill, we're having to learn on the job. So there's a huge amount of change taking place. And so this is a really great time to bring in the idea that has long been known as intrinsic motivation and kind of repackage it and rework it for our era. Because right now we're working and living at a time where your job might not be guaranteed. The goal that you're working towards might change tomorrow. A new LLM might come about tomorrow. A new version of the existing one might come about tomorrow. And everything you've been learning suddenly becomes obsolete the next day. So in this sort of landscape, you have to work with a different kind of motivation. So we have to learn and we have to tailor and curate our jobs. Managers should be curating workloads, to generate as much of this intrinsic motivation as possible. And one way that seems to be a pretty powerful way of deriving it in any context, and intrinsic motivation is notoriously difficult to create, is by this phenomenon called learning progress. It's called learning progress mechanism. And it's one of the researchers behind it is Pierre-Yves Oudier from Paris, who's working with artificial agents. And his team has found how whenever you're doing any kind of work, it's really, really important to have physically kind of something that you can really physically, tangibly feel, obvious progress. So you have to be making rapid progress in something towards a goal and improving through skill or knowledge yourself in some way as fast as you can, as regularly and as solidly as you can while you work. If you can engineer an element of this into what you're doing, you will have sufficient intrinsic motivation in your work. And that is going to be key in the workplace moving forward.
Certainly. That rings true. That gets me fired up, no doubt. Well said. Big thanks to Mithu for sharing wisdom with us, and big thanks to our sponsors. Check them out. One sponsor to check out is Jenny Kane, who will help you step into summer with style and ease. Jenny Kane is a California clothing brand with delightful staples that make getting dressed effortless and delightful. They offer minimalist and refined pieces such as luxurious cashmere sweaters. My own Jenny Kane cashmere hoodie is already a contender for my number one favorite clothing item of all time. It is the perfect answer to every time the office AC gets cranked a little too high. It's warm and cozy and yet somehow still looks super sharp, beautiful, and professional. Jenny Kane has everything you need to embrace your uniform. And for a limited time, Jenny Kane is offering our listeners 15% off of your first order. Go to jennykane.com and use the code AWESOME15 to get that 15% off. That's spelled Jenny, Jenni, Kane, KAYNE.com/awesome15 to get that 15% off. One sponsored checkout is LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring, you want quality professionals who are truly the right fit for a given role. And if you're wearing a ton of hats and short on time, that can be tricky. But LinkedIn Jobs provides great tools to help you find the right professionals super fast. They've even got a nifty new feature that helps you write job descriptions in a jiffy. LinkedIn isn't just a job board, no. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job. Check this out. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit any other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. So hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/beawesome. That's linkedin.com/BEAWESOME to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. Now, could you share a favorite quote, something you find inspiring?
What I would say is my book was really heavily influenced by the work of Marshall McLuhan, who looked at technology and the effect it is having on our brains. One of the quotes that I really love is that we have had a way of working all this time where we've really been working like a marching soldier. We've been moving forward in regular steps in order. We need to change, and we need to now add flair to the way we work, because that will help us get into these unique brain states and produce our best. And he describes that as a transition from a marching soldier to working like a dancing ballerina. And that is really a metaphor for how our work needs to change in this new AI-assisted age of the knowledge age.
Okay. And a favorite book?
So The Medium is the Message is a great book that really gives you a wonderful overview of technology.
Okay. And if folks want to learn more or get in touch, where would you point them?
So I have a website, my name, www.mithustoroni.com. I'm on LinkedIn, Mithu Storoni. I'm also on Twitter X as @MithuStoroni.
All right. And do you have a final challenge or call to action for folks looking to be awesome at their jobs?
Tomorrow, whatever your routine is, just think about this conversation and tailor your day completely differently. Adjust it to your routine and then give us a feedback the day after as to how it went.
All right, Mithu, this is fun. I wish you much hyper efficiency.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
I really love what Mithu said about the art of being able to navigate yourself and stay in the zone is so right on the money in terms of we're not too sleepy and lethargic and slug-like, and we're not too fired up and overstimulated and distracted in every direction. But that art to bring it up when things need to be brought up a little and to bring it down when things need to be brought down a little. And I've been having a lot of fun kind of tinkering with that a little bit and thinking, if something is too boring, okay, how do I make this more exciting and interesting and engaging? Or I will literally set a timer and make it a race against the clock. It's a game and it's exciting and it's thrilling. Or I'll just add some silliness to it, like I am pretending to be Jack Bauer or some terrorist analyst, and this spreadsheet I'm looking at is super critical and has hugely important stakes for millions of lives. It's just silly, it's just goofy, but it does kind of get me a little bit more in the groove. Or if I'm just like totally overwhelmed by something, oh my gosh, that's just too much. I say, all right, Pete, well, we're just going to do the tiniest little bit. We're just going to open up that email and read it twice. That's all we're going to do. That's all I'm committing to, because I'm feeling overwhelmed by a thing. I'm just going to take the tiniest little steps. Like, okay, it's not such a big deal. Just fine. That art, knowing how and when to bring it up or bring it down, to be in that middle gear, so much good stuff. If you want to get a summary write-up of this actionable wisdom, as well as unlocking the archived vault of all 989 of these summaries, please sign up for the Gold Nugget free email newsletter subscription at awesomeatyourjob.com, or to check out the particular transcript and links to items that we've referenced in this episode. That can be found at awesomeatyourjob.com/EP989. Hope to catch you next time, and peace.